The Gospel according to Mark, chapter 8, verses 1 through 21. In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a far way. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they had set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full, and there were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of the broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, Do you not yet understand? Hi, and today we are diving into Mark chapter 8. We are just going right along in this gospel. At the beginning we told you it was fast, and it just comes like a Sports Center top 10 plays, and immediately this, and immediately this. And so we are just working our way through the ministry and the life of Jesus when he was here as a man on earth. And today we come to a miracle which looks very similar to a miracle we saw just about a week or two ago. Here we see Jesus feed 4,000 people with some bread and some fish. What's interesting is when you're reading this, it almost looks like the disciples forgot. It almost looks like they don't quite grasp that Jesus can do this and why he can do this. And so we see a couple things, and I just want to point out as we go through these 21 verses, and I'm going to do some skimming over this just because 21 verses is a lot, and I want to make sure we get to the main point of what we're reading here. Just on a real side note, verse 2, Jesus says, I have compassion on the crowd. That's really great news that Jesus looks on us and has compassion for our needs. He cares for us. The God of the universe, he cares for you. He sees the people and he says, oh, they're hungry. I want to give them food. He didn't have to do that. He could have just been like, they followed me out here, or, well, yeah, I'm worth not having food for. But no, he cares for them, and that's really awesome news for us. So then he says, hey, let's feed them. And the disciples, they ask this question in verse 4. How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? Jesus, how can we give them food? We don't have any. If I was Jesus, I would have been like, weren't you just here? It wasn't that long ago. There were like 5,000 people, and these people were hungry, and I was like, let's feed them. And you're like, I don't have food. And we're like, how much do you have? And they were like, well, this little boy has his lunch, just some bread and some fish, and we fed them. And yet, they're here, and they're like, Jesus, how are we going to feed them? And Jesus, like I said, if I was him, I'd be like, duh, the same way we did last time. But instead, Jesus is much more compassionate and kind than I would be in that situation, a lot less sarcastic, and says, how many loaves do you have? They said 7. So he sits them all down, and they had some fish, and they ate and were satisfied, and they fed about 4,000 people. He sent them away, and at the end of it, there were 7 baskets full of bread left and fish left. That is a lot of baskets, right? I mean, it's just 7 pieces of bread, and there are 7 baskets left? That's insane. And then the Pharisees start to argue with Jesus. These are the religious leaders of the day, the people who Jesus coming, his teaching actually was showing that their authority was false, showing that their high and mightiness, that they thought they knew everything. Jesus is actually showing them their self-centeredness, their pride, and that he is their center of worship. And it kind of wrecked everything that they believed at the time. And so they didn't like Jesus, and they're saying, hey, Jesus, we need to see a sign. Prove to us you're God. Prove. Come on. And Jesus, again, if it was me, I'd be like, did you just see what I did? I just fed like 4,000 people with a few pieces of bread. I don't know what else you need. Did you see that dude I healed last week? Did you see the dude I healed yesterday? That woman that was bleeding? See that daughter that I rose from the dead? Jairus' daughter? Did you see all of that? And the Pharisees are like, no, we need a sign. Jesus is like, no sign's going to be given to this generation. Part of this, and I think about us, is there's so many times I look around and I'm like, and I have conversations with people and they're like, how do you know there's a God? I won't believe it until I see it. And I imagine Jesus being like, look at all the signs I've given you. Look at creation. Look at how organized all of creation is, the order. Look at how the church is sustained. Look at all these things. Look at space. Look at all this evidence I've given you in science. Look, there is a God. And we're like, prove it. He's like, you're not going to get a sign. Like, you don't believe what you're seeing anyway. So you're not going to believe the next sign. You're going to explain that away. And so Jesus tells the disciples this parable where he says, in verse 15, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, the leaven of Herod. Now, for those of you who don't know what leaven is something that you bake bread with. A lot of it's yeast, right? And it makes the bread rise. It makes it look like bread and taste like bread. My wife actually yesterday baked homemade bread, and side note, delicious. I love bread. All things bread, just phenomenal. And Jesus is telling them, beware of the leaven, and you don't need that much yeast to make bread rise, right? It's a ton of flour, a ton of all this stuff, and then just a little bit of yeast. But yet just a little bit of yeast impacts all of the bread. And so Jesus is telling them like, hey, don't buy into what the Pharisees are selling, even a little bit. Because if you buy into it a little bit, it impacts everything about you. But the disciples are confused and they're like, I don't know what the heck he's talking about. And Jesus is like, how do you not understand? He's not ridiculing them in the way that he ridicules the Pharisees. He's helping the disciples along in the same way he helps us who are his children along. And he shows them and walks them through and is like, and he basically shows them how he is what he calls himself, the bread of life. Bread is what's known as something that's sustaining. It gives us life. It nourishes us. It gives us energy. And Jesus is the bread of life. And as the bread of life, he's the only thing that can fill us completely, and he's the only thing that can sustain us and give us joy. Ultimate, lasting joy. And so he's showing us that he is the bread of life. That we don't need the yeast, even if it's just a little bit of what the world offers, that, hey, this is where joy and satisfaction is, because just a little bit of yeast impacts the entire loaf. Our entire lives should be surrendered around the bread of life, who is Jesus. He's offering you sustaining life. He wants to sustain you. And he can sustain you. He's the only thing that can sustain you. He's the only thing that can give you joy and peace. I mean, look around the world right now. Everything that we would have taken comfort in before, money, jobs, school, friends, sports, like all of these things have been taken away from us little by little. And Jesus is like, that's because trying to be satisfied by anything else in life ruins the whole loaf. He's the only one that can satisfy us. Do you believe that? See you guys next time.